Hello, and welcome to Horns of a Dilemma, the podcast of the Texas National Security Review, TNSR. I'm Doyle Hodges, Executive Editor of TNSR. Imagine you're the police chief of a town and you know that bank robbers are coming to rob the town's bank. But now imagine that every business in the town also has a vault loaded with riches. Oh, and by the way, every citizen in the town has a vault in which they keep their precious possessions. And each one of those vaults has problems with either its lock or perhaps with its reliability, each one slightly different depending on its make, but all exploitable by criminals. Oh, and now instead of needing just bank robbers, there are dozens and dozens of criminals who have the capability to open them. Oh, and now in addition to bank robbers and other criminals, you also have the agents of other governments trying to open all of these vaults. Put all those problems together and add to it that not everyone who you need's cooperation in order to solve these problems works for you, and you start to have the job description of today's guest on Horns of a Dilemma. Brandon Wales is the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency's first executive director, serving as the senior career executive helping oversee execution of CISA operations. He's responsible for leading long-term strategy development, managing CISA-wide policy initiatives, and ensuring effective operational collaboration across the agency. CISA spoke with Bobby Chesney at the Strauss Center's Cyber 912 Challenge, which was a simulation-based, judge-graded competition in which teams consisting of 3 to 4 students, who can be either graduate students or undergrads from any disciplinary background, collaborated to provide policy analysis and recommendations in response to an evolving fictional fact pattern related to cyber crisis and conflict. Wales's remarks focus on real-world cyber crises, including the Log4j vulnerability and responses to the SolarWinds hack. This is an interesting conversation that has relevance to the field of national and personal security and is a fascinating overview over how cyber operations intersect almost every aspect of the government and economy. Let's listen in.
Okay, I think we've waited long enough and we can go ahead and get started. So thanks for coming out during the lunch hour for what is, to my mind, going to be one of the things I've been most looking forward to this entire time, which is hearing from our fabulous keynote speaker. It's my great pleasure to welcome Brandon Wales of the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. Brandon is the inaugural executive director for CISA. In that capacity, he's got a variety of weighty responsibilities. These include, for one thing, curating and developing CISA's long-term strategy, but at the same time also managing current policy initiatives across the agency. Ensuring effective operational coordination across all the increasingly complicated, increasingly busy components within the organization. Brandon's got the perfect background for this task. I'm going to hit a few of the career highlights, and I'm going to omit so much because it's a really long list of amazing jobs he's held. Most recently, before this position, he was actually the acting director of CISA itself, and he had this position during a period that's the names of the events that unfolded during this recent period, it's like a litany to document the pace and scale and significance of the overarching challenge we face in this space. SolarWinds, Orion, CISA, Colonial Pipeline, Pulse Connect, the Microsoft Exchange stuff, episode after episode after episode. I can't even imagine what it was like at that time. But then again, that's kind of every day now. So before that, Brandon was Chief of Staff to the Secretary of Homeland Security, having previously been the Deputy Chief of Staff, and before that, the Secretary's Senior Counsel for Cyber and Resilience. And I could go on in this vein. I could talk about his earlier leadership of DHS's, what I'll describe as analytic functions relating to cyber and infrastructure. But it's much better for me to stop talking and for Brandon to start talking. So I'm going to turn the floor over to him with the big, hearty Texas welcome. It's just a shame we couldn't be here all together in person so I could treat you to some proper barbecue, Brandon. But hey, I can at least treat you to some free Zoom. So welcome.
Bobby, thank you. A really kind introduction. And I'm really excited to be here with you and with everyone who's taking part in this Cyber 912 strategy challenge. I want to thank both you and then the Atlantic Council and U of T at Austin for inviting me to participate in this. As you said, I wish I could be there in person. I think when Director Krebs was here 2 years ago, you got to join you for your National Security Law podcast. I think you mostly talked about the band Rush instead of cybersecurity.
We did.
But maybe today would be Meatloaf instead of Rush. But I'm happy to be here and talking to you in this virtual environment. And for the free Zoom, I guess I can get my own DC-based barbecue after this.
Good luck.
I think that the idea that we're here virtually, I think, is extremely relevant to exactly the topic we're dealing with, which is the increasing convergence of our physical and virtual worlds, a trend that has been accelerating and will continue to accelerate. And I think it's the reason why so many of the participants are here today to test themselves, along with other bright minds in the cybersecurity field, to find solutions to the problems that, frankly, all of us, including here in government, are trying to solve. And I think, as everyone knows, the cybersecurity problems we face are incredibly complex. And it's inexorably tied to national and foreign policy, human rights, energy security, financial security, internet governance, cyber warfare, and I can kind of go on. Everyone's participation in this 9/12 challenge is critical to developing the cyber talent that we need to defend our nation. Today, you'll be asked to respond to a cyber attack in real time, working with peers to find solutions to problems that may have more than one answer. You'll be challenged to find solutions when there are no perfect solutions. Everything you decide to do in response to the simulated cyber attack will have consequences. You'll have to experience much like you would in the actual cybersecurity community. To that end, the CISA leadership team actually got together yesterday morning for a few hours to talk about what we might do in the face of a cyber incident affecting us, given the complex geopolitical environment that we're facing. We're going through some of the same exact types of challenges that you are. The fact that we're going through this at this time is relevant, because of the pace of cyber incident that we're facing. And Bobby, you listed a few of them, but there are cyber incidents that are affecting the public and private sector companies every 40 seconds. And the damages run easily into the billions every year. And while this digital revolution that has enabled us to connect virtually, connecting humans across the globe, there are more opportunities for our adversaries to harm schools, hospitals, municipalities, pipelines, businesses. At the end of the day, if it has a network connection to the outside world, it's at risk right now. And so some of the attacks that you had mentioned earlier, SolarWinds, Exchange, Pulse, Secure, Windows Print Spooler, the ransomware attacks that hit Colonial Pipelines and JBS Foods and Kaseya, and right now dealing with the vulnerabilities in the Log4j library. The consequences of neglecting cybersecurity are having actual real world consequences, both to the people here and really around the world. Now, CISA's role is to serve as a trusted partner to help ensure that the nation's critical infrastructure has the information, the resources, and the tools needed to secure the networks that they operate in to improve the security of ultimately their operations. Across the government and critical infrastructure sectors, we still see such common problems with cybersecurity, from outdated applications and operating systems to the challenges that are really rooted in human factors, poor password practices, not enabling multi-factor authentication, clicking on unsafe URLs, opening attachments to unsolicited emails. All of those challenges, which adversaries continue to exploit, could very easily be solved. But frankly, they require kind of constant due diligence that is often lacking. At CISA, the nation's cyber and infrastructure defense agency, we've got kind of two main roles in this space: to serve as the operational lead for federal cybersecurity and to serve as the national coordinator for critical infrastructure security and resilience. But CISA wasn't designed to be your traditional government bureaucracy. We try to really view ourselves as a hybrid public-private collaboration. And we are an agency built on that foundation of collaboration, information sharing, and action across both the public and private sectors. And this is really at the heart of what we are doing to try to raise collective defense. So I'll use one initiative that we launched 6 months ago, the Joint Cyber Defense Collaborative, which really builds on these partnerships and led to the development and supposed to design to lead the development of the nation's cyber defense plans by working with government and industry to help defend the nation against cyber threats. The JCDC, as we call it, brings together the authorities, capabilities, and talents of government from CISA, the National Security Agency, the FBI, Cyber Command, DOJ, DNI, and others, with the power of industry to enable shared situational awareness of the threat landscape, to plan and exercise against the most significant cyber threats, and to implement cyber defense operations against these threats, particularly at the scale enabled by bringing in the private sector. The idea is to create a proactive capability for government and the private sector to work together before an incident occurs to truly operationalize collaboration. And we're also bringing in our partners at the sector risk management agencies. So these are agencies like Departments of Energy and Treasury and Health and Human Services and Transportation, who have unique subject matter expertise on the nation's critical infrastructure, have them at the planning table. So we are all positioned to take concrete actions to improve cyber defenses across the infrastructure sectors. And individual owners and operators and state and local governments have a similar role, bringing their unique abilities to drive cyber defense activities in their companies and jurisdictions and bringing that to the table. And with the assembly of this knowledge, capacity, and commitment, we'll be able to better prepare and deepen our operational collaboration that will reduce the risk of cyber attacks. And while CISA may host the Joint Cyber Defense Collaborative, the entity is called Joint for a reason, and it is really a platform that belongs to all of the key partners equally, whether that's in the government or industry. Whoever has a problem, bring it to the table, and we have a unified approach to finding the solution. In addition to standing up the JCDC, we're also leaning into several new authorities granted to CISA at the beginning of 2020 by Congress, including using new administrative subpoena authority to enable us to notify companies and governments about critical internet-facing vulnerabilities, providing expanded cybersecurity training and education opportunities that I'm going to talk a little bit more about in a few minutes, and establishing a cybersecurity advisory committee to help us think through not only the challenges of today, but the threats that exist in our imaginations and how we can be better postured to tackle future challenges. Happy to say that Bobby here is a member of that cybersecurity advisory committee, and really looking forward to seeing what Bobby and the rest of the really tremendous members that we've got assembled can bring to the table. Now, the JCDC has been essential to address the risks from the recently announced Log4Shell vulnerability since we first became aware of it in mid-December. And we quickly realized that this was one of the most dangerous vulnerabilities we have ever seen. As you may already know, software products are often comprised of libraries, which are suites of data and programming code used to develop software and applications. Log4j is a particular library developed by the nonprofit Apache Foundation that allows software to log various types of data from your computer system's performance to security issues to pretty much any type of information that a developer may want to have their application log. And Log4j is a library contained in an extremely large number of software products. And Log4Shell is a vulnerability that is contained in that library and that we're concerned about for a number of reasons. First, as I said, it's extremely widespread. The Log4j library is embedded into literally thousands of distinct commercial products. And based upon submissions that we received as we tried to work through and create an authoritative catalog, that number is nearing 3,000. And given these products scale, the vulnerability is therefore likely present in literally hundreds of millions of individual technology assets that are deployed in businesses and governments and individual user computers around the world. And because the Log4j library is embedded into these thousands of products, the vendor for each individual product must produce their own unique patch. And in some cases, if you've got products embedded in products, you can't patch until one's further up the food chain patch first. Secondly, exploiting this vulnerability is trivial. A threat actor can use this vulnerability to compromise a target system by typing only 12 characters into a text message, an email subject line, or a chat window in something like Minecraft. Third, exploiting this vulnerability potentially allows an adversary to gain deep access into a target network. I think this is something that we've seen time and again with other of our significant cyber incidents over the past several years, things like SolarWinds and a Microsoft Exchange server, that there are products that are embedded deeply into networks with broad administrative rights and access, and compromising there allows an adversary pretty much widespread access to a target network and system and the ability to create new accounts and do whatever they need to do to develop compromised assets, establish persistence inside of that system, and undertake either disruptive or destructive attacks should they choose to do so. So over the past month, we have seen widespread exploitation of the Log4Shell by criminal actors, installing crypto mining software on victim computers to capture to take control of those victim computers to use as botnets or to launch future attacks. We have seen reports of more sophisticated activity using Log4Shell, including an attack on the Belgian Ministry of Defense. Several cybersecurity companies have reported that nation-state adversaries are developing attacks using Log4Shell, but those are not widespread at this time. And there's reasons why we may not be seeing the more significant intrusions just yet. The adversaries could be planting exploits and then waiting until network defenders are on lower alert before they fully use their new access to take over systems, or they could be biding their time. We saw in the case of the major Equifax breach back in 2017 that was actually using a vulnerability that had been released and patched more than 6 months before. So just because someone has not executed a large attack using this vulnerability just yet, we really expect it to happen in the future, and why we're continuing to try to drive remediation for vulnerable assets, and why we'll continue to do that for months to come. I think in like a lot of areas in this, trying to address this vulnerability, CISA is really trying to serve as a single authoritative source for information, whether that's coming from industry or government. Take what we know about the vulnerability, about the threat activity, about the mitigations, and then pull it all together so that everyone can benefit from that knowledge. And we're also leveraging the power of the JCDC to tackle this vulnerability in new ways. We've established a virtual collaboration platform to share technical information in real time in one space with the major cybersecurity and technology companies and the government. Nearly 20 of the nation's largest cybersecurity companies and technology companies are part of this, along with FBI and NSA. And through this collaboration, we received 14 analyses of Log4Shell vulnerability in a very open, transparent way between government and all of these different, in some cases, competitive cybersecurity and technology companies. We saw 17 submissions of technical data about the threat activity at a speed and scale that we would not have seen in the past approaches to information sharing. And so we've leveraged the information we receive to issue public advisories about the best practices to mitigate this risk. This was the first advisory ever that was issued between CISA, FBI, NSA, and all 5 of our 5I partners, UK, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. And really tremendous coordination across the globe to try to take on this problem. I think, as you can see, our challenges are substantial. And I hope that everyone here can see how your participation in the cybersecurity community can be crucial to helping us take on some of these significant problems. And speaking of this community, I'd like to share a little about what we're doing to help develop and train the cybersecurity workforce who will be, with us and helping tackle these problems for years to come. I think some of these stats are well known. 3.5 million unfilled cybersecurity positions around the world, more than 500,000 of those openings here in North America. And, CISA is trying to do its part to help address this. We're working to build pathways to help America's academic institutions better prepare students for cybersecurity, including investing in the Scholarship for Service program, which provides scholarships for students for careers in cybersecurity in exchange for government service. We're also starting earlier. We've got a K through 12 program that has provided cybersecurity curricula to over 26,000 teachers that has overall influenced about 3 million students to join the cybersecurity career fields. And I think we've got more work to come in the future, particularly in the K through 12 area. We've got a program now designed to focus more on underserved communities and Title I schools, looking to reach students with disabilities and to increase our reach to historically Black colleges and universities. In addition, partnering with organizations like Girls Who Code, we also offered a new funding opportunity for nonprofits focused on identifying and developing unrealized cybersecurity talent in underserved communities. And opening these underserved communities will help us build a cybersecurity workforce that really reflects America's makeup, brings together diversity of ethnicity, gender, education, neurodiversity. And all of this adds new experiences and points of view that strengthen our ability to solve problems. And ultimately, cybersecurity is in part technical, but really it's a problem-solving field. And we need people who have creative ways of solving problems. And that's why diversity has been so critical. And we're also looking at additional ways of using a workforce that already exists. So we've been working on a reskilling program to retrain non-cybersecurity federal professionals to have entry-level cybersecurity opportunities through a kind of 12-month cadre program. We've released a new cyber workforce training guide that individuals across the federal government can use to chart a career in cybersecurity, and all designed to make careers in cybersecurity more accessible and allow more people to envision what their role could be in a cybersecurity profession. And so as you prepare for your cybersecurity future, keep us in mind, but if you don't, many other places to go. And really, I would encourage you to look for and use your talents in a variety of ways, both in government and in private sector, and move in between them. We always need kind of new perspectives and people with deep experience to come into the fold. So we here at CISA are really excited to see how this competition plays out today. We're certain that you will use your talents and creativity to come up with new approaches and solutions that will benefit everyone. And whether this is your first time participating or you're a veteran, we're looking forward to seeing what you're bringing to the table. And with that, I'm going to turn things back over to Bobby and just say, really appreciate the work that everyone is doing here. And everything that you're going to contribute now and in the future to the nation's cyber defense. So thank you.
Thanks, Brandon. Let me encourage everybody to take advantage of the Q&A function to start filling that up with the questions you'd like me to relay here into the conversation. We've got a great one from Wendy that I'm going to pose in just a moment. I'll take moderator's privilege to throw my own stuff into the queue at the front. And I wanted to ask Brandon, if you could share a bit of overview about binding operational directives and emergency directives. And obviously these are authorities, these related but distinct authorities are getting used more and more often. And everybody who's listening, if you just go look at CISA's homepage, do a search for CISA binding operational directives, and you can get very quickly to the catalog. And it just reads like it's sort of a rogue, the emergency directives are a rogues gallery of recent problems and directives about mitigation. So, Brandon, that part's pretty easy for people to get. Like, oh, there's a thing we need the federal civilian executive branch to do. Here's what you have to do, and here's by when you have to do it. Here's how to do it. How binding operational directives feel like a little bit broader. Can you just talk about that? And in particular, can you talk about the most recent 2201, which is we might describe as sort of a directive to the federal civilian executive branch entities to catalog their risk practices regarding vulnerabilities. Can you unpack all that and give us some context?
Sure. So I'll give you a little bit about how we think about the distinction. I think if you read the underlying authority, the language is somewhat similar between the binding operational directives and emergency directives, but we think about them, I think somewhat how you describe them is that the binding operational directives are designed to be more strategic. They are designed to create a stronger risk posture for federal civilian executive branch agencies over the long term, whereas emergency directives are dealing with immediate problems that need very rapid action. So you will see things like we issued emergency directive right after we found out about SolarWinds. I think maybe Sunday night, early Monday morning at like 12 or 1 a.m. we issued that emergency directive. The weekend we found out about it, telling agencies to immediately take all SolarWinds devices offline and then complete a series of actions. Or we issued an emergency directive on Log4Shell, requiring agencies to patch that vulnerability where patches were available, and to take other compensating actions where patches were not yet available, within 7 days. Our binding operational directives are more strategic. So there are ones on, agencies need to establish a vulnerability disclosure program over the course of a year and begin to put that into practice. Or we issued a binding operational directive, requiring agencies to institute DMARC for email security, things like that are designed to be not going to be done within a week or a few days because there's an exigent crisis, but it's designed to kind of create stronger cyber posture for those agencies. Now, the most recent binding operational directive that we instituted was in some respects designed to kind of be a bridge between our binding operational directives and avoid a lot of emergency directives. So what it said was, CISA is creating a catalog of known exploited vulnerabilities. So there are hundreds of vulnerabilities announced every single week and populating into the CVE database maintained by MITRE. But many of those are not exploited. But there are some that are both really important and where we're seeing adversaries use them to exploit networks. And we believe those are the ones that businesses and government agencies should be prioritizing. So we've created this public known exploited vulnerabilities catalog, and we update it whenever we see critical vulnerabilities being exploited in the wild in ways that we think require more aggressive action. And so last week, we actually updated it with, I think, 13 new known exploited vulnerabilities into the catalog. And what this binding operational directive said is, agencies need to take stock of that known exploited vulnerability catalog. As new vulnerabilities come out, there'll be a set time for them to patch those vulnerabilities based upon the severity of the vulnerability and the degree of exploitation that we're seeing in the wild. And so it really was designed to say agencies need to have a vulnerability patching program that can ingest this information and use it continuously. So we don't have to issue a new emergency directive if a critical vulnerability comes out. We could just populate that vulnerability into known exploited vulnerability catalog and say that it needs to be patched within 7 days. And then the agencies, because of this binding operational directive, need to take that step. And we're always looking for creative ways of using our binding operational directive authority. We try not to overuse it. We probably only have issued about 12.5 binding operational directives over the past several years. We try to be really, thoughtful about where we do it. We think that if we used it a lot, agencies would become a bit more numb to it and may not take as aggressive action. But I think because we've used it really thoughtfully and really strategically, we've gotten high degree of compliance, and it has changed the posture of the federal government. Just using DMARC as just a quick example, before we issued the binding operational on DMARC for email security, the federal government, of all the sectors of the U.S. economy, was the worst in implementation of email security. After we issued the DMARC binding operational directive, the federal government is now far and away the leader in implementing email security across the entire United States of any sector of the economy. So I think it can have a real profound effect on security. It just requires us to kind of be thoughtful, do the amount of upfront coordination with the federal agencies, and then be really aggressive in following up to make sure that the agencies are taking action.
It's a striking authority difference when you think about what you guys are able to accomplish and the benefits that flow from it you just described, as long as it's speaking to the other federal civilian executive branch agencies. As soon as we turn the focus towards private sector entities, critical infrastructure, especially significant aspects of critical infrastructure, and then the rest of us, it's a whole different story. Of course, you guys can't issue the directives that way, and then it's all cooperative.
But we do release them publicly with the design to say anyone could benefit from the knowledge that we're putting out in these binding operational directives. And we know that in some cases, state and local governments will use our binding operational directives to push that guidance down, in some cases, mandatory ways in their jurisdictions. Or there are times where regulators inside the regulated community at the federal level will rely upon some of the guidance that we push out to enforce on terms of their regulated community, even to the extent that the Federal Trade Commission a few weeks ago basically issued a note that, patching the Log4j, the Log4shell vulnerability would be looked at as an important part of due diligence if there was a breach, and whether FTC would take regulatory action against that entity. So we think that there are ways in which we could that the guidance we put out, even when it's not compulsory, can have a real profound effect on the broader cybersecurity in the non-regulated world.
That FTC action was which was really innovative on their part, and therefore perhaps a little controversial. Really interesting is exactly what I had in mind there. The FTC, as is often the case, has been bit by bit filling the general regulatory space when the sector-specific regulators obviously can't reach beyond their narrow bounds. TSA can do certain things, but only as to their regulated industries. FTC can pick up anybody who's in competition, roughly speaking. And that was a novelty. And it'll be interesting to see if they continue to use, there's direct regulatory directives like the binding operational directives. And then there's enforcement agencies that can have a similar effect, not by promulgating a directive, but by telling you what they might do with their enforcement powers, which is perhaps an even more attention-grabbing thing, depending on what you've been up to. Let's go to the list. There's so many great questions here. Wendy Nather has this question about Log4j and in this question of how CISA interacts with peer agencies and private sector security firms in other countries. What sort of international cooperation mechanisms are there?
Sure. So those come in a couple of different flavors. So I would say, one, many of the major cybersecurity firms and IT firms that we deal with, including the ones that are part of the Joint Cyber Defense Collaborative, have an international footprint and are working across the globe. And so part of the benefit of bringing in these companies is that they have visibility into what's happening around the world, unlike anything else, including all the information available to the federal government, including the intelligence community. So you can imagine the telemetry that Microsoft collects from all of its assets around the world. You think about the presence of major cybersecurity firms like CrowdStrike and Mandiant, et cetera, around the world, providing incident response and network security effort, support to companies and agencies and governments in numerous countries. So that is obviously one way in which we're both benefiting and providing information that will help help foreign countries. Second is we have very strong relationships with our counterparts around the world. Those start with the close relationships we have with our Five Eye partners that I mentioned earlier, but frankly, we have extremely close relationships with the CERTs, the computer emergency response teams, in nearly 100 countries around the world, and are regularly engaging with them. There's a small community that's called the International Watch and Warning Network, made up of kind of 16 countries that are largely in Europe and a little bit in Asia, where we are almost immediately in a chat room together when we're seeing activity, providing information, asking what other folks are seeing, how we can all benefit from it. So there are numerous mechanisms that we use for collaboration. In some cases, we have formal agreements. In some cases, it's more ad hoc. But whenever we see something, there is a lot of touch points with our international partners, because we recognize that many of these challenges in cyber are going to be global problems, and that will require global solutions.
A lot of it looks like what's happened is I think a lot of the participants were not able to post directly, and so they're routing their comments through Ali prints from our team. So Ali, thank you for harvesting those. So someone has asked for you to expand on the obstacles and challenges with recruiting talent at CISA. And as part of that, I'll just add in, and can you talk about whether there's any particular credentials that people like those on this webinar could pursue that would help advance their chances to get hired at CISA? So what are the biggest general obstacles, and what in particular can be done to enhance a particular applicant's appeal to CISA?
Sure. So, I'd say first, like any government bureaucracy, there are just the normal challenges of getting people through the system at the speed at which we would like. The systems that we use for background checks and others just are take more time. Second, there's some questions about compensation, particularly at the lower levels where industry is much more competitive than we are. I think we offer kind of a unique way of kind of building skills and giving people access to really tremendous capabilities and the ability to really see how the work that they're doing has a tremendous impact on the ground. But that can be challenging when competing for scarce cybersecurity talent. And it's just making sure that people are aware of kind of the opportunities. We're not going to be maybe as aggressive, on campus as recruiting as some of the private sector might be. And so making sure that people know that these kind of opportunities that we have available here are open to them, which is why we think some of these new ways of reaching out to universities or things like Scholarship for Service are so critical. On terms of the, whether you need some kind of specific certification or others, I think that there's a variety of jobs that are cybersecurity roles that are outside of the technical sphere. We have people who are working on cybersecurity policy. We have cybersecurity lawyers who specialize in supporting the work that we're doing, understanding the authorities and how to make sure we use them while complying with the law. And so there's not one path to a cybersecurity field. We need people who are good at working with external partners. All that work that I just described, working with technology companies and international partners, those are people who are about building relationships. They may need to know enough about the cybersecurity challenges that we're facing, but really these are about people who can build and sustain close partnerships. And so we're looking for people who've got a good attitude, who can think creatively, and we can find a place for you in the cybersecurity workforce here at CISA. Sure, if you want to go down a technical road and be in an incident response role or be one of our malware analysts. There are going to be things that you're going to want to focus on from a technical perspective to make you more competitive in those areas. But the field is very diverse, and we need people with a lot of different skills and backgrounds to be successful in it. We have people who manage complex programs for the federal government, big acquisition programs where we're deploying technology. And so the kinds of skills that you can bring to the table here are incredibly varied. So if you've got an inkling of wanting to pursue this career, there's probably a way to do it within CISA.
Here's another question I think is very, very apt. So you mentioned some of the new authorities. You mentioned the administrative subpoena authority. I don't know if you mentioned or not, there's also the expansion or the tweaking of the threat hunting on FCEB networks. So there's been a couple of new tools added to the tool set. I would say just in time, a little bit late, but better late than never. What else? What else do you need? What are some things that we might see CISA pursuing either currently or in the future that would be very helpful to the mission?
Sure. So the big one that we have been pushing is to have mandatory incident reporting for cyber incidents for critical infrastructure. It's one we got within a hair's breadth of getting through on the recently passed National Defense Authorization Act, but we're like 4 hours too late in getting congressional agreement between the various committees to get it in. And I think that one is really illuminating. CISA wants to get mandatory incident reporting, not because we want to be able to hold people accountable for failing to comply, but because we think that gaining access to that information really reinforces and buttresses our voluntary authorities by enriching the information that we have available to provide to the broader community about what's happening out there. I mean, we see the information that we would get through mandatory incident reporting as critical for us being able to spot adversary campaigns earlier in their life cycle, the ability to warn people earlier about new cybersecurity tactics and techniques that our adversaries are using so that there's less future victims of those types of incidents, and to help us prioritize where we may need to offer our technical assistance and incident response support to what's happening out there. So that's a big one. But there are other ones that we're looking at, including things like reforming the Federal Information Security Modernization Act, FISMA, which really governs how cybersecurity works inside the federal government. We think that there's a lot of interest in reforming it, and it needs to be updated to reflect both more modern challenges that we're facing, also new things that are out there, like the Office of the National Cyber Director and its role vis-a-vis CISA, vis-a-vis the Office of Management and Budget. So there's some new areas that we want to work with on FISMA, and that's one that we are actively working with Congress now on.
It's interesting. That dovetails with, there's a pair of questions here that both have a common theme of being proactive for prevention purposes and harm prevention purposes, as opposed to always being reactive and in the mitigation and reduction of harm after the fact business. And that's a familiar dynamic across federal security policies. I mean, to take the most sort of glaring example, there's counterterrorism, where the whole mindset is to shift into a prevention mode. That's sort of the story of, especially post 9/11. Is there a similar story to be told about cybersecurity, where there is an ongoing sort of center of gravity shift? Of course, we're always going to do mitigation and incident response, but do you perceive there to be a seismic shift towards getting in front of these problems before they turn into getting left of click instead of always being right of click?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of what we spend our time in is actually trying to raise awareness of cybersecurity and have people do the types of basic cyber hygiene that would remove most of the noise of what's happening in the cybersecurity world. So, if people implemented MFA or there's a dramatic reduction in phishing, those things could account for, north of 90% reduction in cybersecurity incidents affecting entities. So we're constantly pushing that. Now, the reality is, in cyber, the adversaries are, as focused as we are in creating novel ways of circumventing the cybersecurity that we have in place. So we're always going to be able to deal with it. And I think in this case, kind of going back to, some of what I was referencing on the cyber incident reporting legislation, it's really about our ability to very quickly spot what's happening and prevent future victims. So even if you cannot prevent the first victim, can we prevent the second one? I mean, our goal is that no attack is successful only once. That as soon as it's detected, that can be reported and that can be shared, and no one else can fall victim to the same exact vulnerability. That's a tall order. It's going to require a lot of cooperation. It's going to require us to be able to move with real speed and flexibility. We're trying to put in place those, the practices and capabilities, capacity to be able to do that. But it's the way in which we're thinking about that to get exactly to your point. We need to get way ahead of this. Dealing from an incident response perspective means that there's already a lot of bad problems already happening. If you've already been hit by ransomware, that is too late to start talking about what you should be doing about ransomware. You want to deal with that problem way in advance.
Yeah, I'm mindful that we've actually exceeded the time you gave us. So I just have to close by pointing this out. So you mentioned earlier that when Chris Krebs was with us, he talked about his love for the band Rush. And we talked earlier about how Jen Easterly right now, you can see Meatloaf on her Twitter feed. So the question for you is, who's your band, Brandon?
I guess as a child of the 80s, I guess I'll go with Aerosmith.
Oh, solid choice. Nice. On that note, we will say thank you so much for spending time with us. Please, everyone, stay on here because we are in just a moment going to announce the final round participants and the judges. But Brandon, again, thank you for all that you're doing. As one of the questions we didn't get to answer points out, the pace of activity is crazy. So I can't imagine how you even get sleep at night with all the things that are going on. And we all appreciate what you and your colleagues are doing. And these students who are on this call, hopefully many of them will soon be joining you to do the work from inside CISA's perimeter.
We're looking forward to it. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Bobby, and good luck to the finalists.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Horns of a Dilemma, and please don't forget to visit our website at tnsr.org.